Good morning. So I just want to talk about, well, how do I say this? I thought I would go over kind of the what's interesting to me about our hobby, role play. Uh, so one reason I prefer simple is I prefer character and conflict to story. I prefer now again, this is as a player, as a character, right? As a GM, it's a whole different thing for me. When I GM, the goal is to facilitate the game. It's my goal as a GM, depending on the game system, is to not only facilitate a game mechanically, the way it's written and the way it's supposed to provide a thing for the players, right? So GMing for me is a big difference than being a character player. I used to try to do more character as a GM. I used to do so now. I might take on a voice and I might present myself in first person, especially in a role play. But for the most part, I'm definitely more um, casual as a GM now than I've probably ever been. And the goal is to provide the actual system for me, right? Unless the system demands, right? Okay, but anyway, the gist of what I'm saying is why I've always liked simple games, despite the actual mechanical apparatus. 18 dice or one die, or right, is simple. It was an easy threshold for actually getting into a space, a shared space for me as a GM and for me as a character. And then my goal, I mean, I really do prefer to the character is more important to me than success. Um, because success is not what ultimately, it's not how we experience and grow. Ultimately, we experience, but you don't have to be successful for it to be remarkable outcomes and remarkable a series of conflicts, right? So for me, the most important piece of gaming is conflict and characters. The story comes out of those things, right? The actions Joe takes because he's got a dilemma, a choice to make, and that choice is not necessarily right or wrong. It's going to be ultimately, I won't say risk reward, but there is that sense that there should be, in a way, a gamble going on, right? Whether that gamble is involving your attribute checks or whether that gamble is a choice. For me, the best way to define this is, I was thinking about the difference just recently. My Return of the Heavyweight Champ. I imported a career boxing game 20 years ago from Alzad Games in Britain, and it's you pick a boxer from a stable of boxers, and your goal is to try to win the heavyweight title. And you win the game. If you do that, you win the game, and everything else, right? It's decisions that you're making. Now, there's some dice rolls that are random, and there's an actual boxing simulator. It's very simple. You flip a card, and it just determines whether you win the round or not. I mean, the boxing portion of the game is pretty much it's you shuffle the deck of cards and it's pretty random event. But it's the decision making that makes the game so great. Right? Should I train? Should I actually have a fight? If I'm going to have a fight, who do I fight? Because I'm trying to build a career. I'm trying to not get injured. I'm trying to win the heavyweight title. And what makes that game so remarkable is all the choices are on me, right? I have to actually make choices strategically, hoping that it all kind of unfolds so I can have the best chance to win the heavyweight title, therefore win the game. So there's a game to this solitaire boxing career. And that's rare for me. I don't get that in role playing. I mean, it's incredibly rare that there's this necessary sense of choice and that there is consequences for one direction, etc. Constantly in role playing games, we get the challenge all the time, right? And again, this is one of those things where I argue that the constant challenge, make a roll, make a roll, make a roll, make a roll, is by far less interesting than choice, right? I mean, so yes, there's challenge, right? We've got to overcome the obstacle, and that's usually going to be predicated upon your attributes. It's going to be predicated upon your character sheet, and therefore players are going to be tending toward the thing they do best as a mechanical device. I'm strong, so there are things it's going to be easier for me to do, or I'm smart, so I'm gonna pick skills, and I'm gonna try to hopefully put my character in a position to maximize his knowledge of religion and theology. But if I'm playing in a game where it never comes up, my character is ultimately irrelevant, right? What ends up happening is my character becomes a voice in the party, But I never see the value of my skill in theology, because the GM and the state of the direction of the game, I never get to use my religious abilities, right? I never get to do those things. It's fascinating, which, and part of that is the choices we make as far as the games we choose to play. They become, again, traditionally dungeon crawl, D&D. I mean, those systems tend toward the combat situation, right? They don't. Old school D&D, definitely, right? I mean, your cleric is a series of numbers who can do certain types of magical abilities and turn undead. Those become the things your character does, like I did the other night in our game. That's my role in the party, right? Role playing is not just being a character and playing a role as a personality. My role is to step forward and banish that thing before it kills two of my party members, right? And hopefully I succeed at that, right? Because there's a challenge on the table. I can't just turn him. I can't just banish him. But you could, right? And there probably are role-playing games where it's a given that my character could just banish it. That's my role. My role is to say you're banished. There's no check. There's no result, because that's what I'm capable of. That would work. It would work 100%, right? Where my character would get in dilemmas is when I'm caught in a situation my character doesn't have that automatic effect, right? And that would be where we're rolling dice, right? So I think that's kind of cool. So of course, if it's a vampire level, HD7 vampire, of course my character couldn't just say, get out of here, Dracula, right? So that's where the role comes in play, right? So I just think these are interesting. And of course, that's just the nature of the mechanics, the nature of what the game's designed to do. So I don't want to get into an argument that all games should be this way, because I'm not talking about all games. There is a direct correlation to the experience you have is based on the mechanisms the game is designed to draw out. The mechanisms the game is designed to call on, the mechanisms the game is going to ask you to do as a player in a game at a table. But most important for me as a character, as a player, is experiencing the circumstances, the situation, the world, the setup, the whatever you want to call it, as a character, not so much as a successful mechanical device. And it works. If I can play D&D and be in character, don't worry myself with whether I turn successfully or whether I make the save versus poison. It's just, it's a die roll. It's out of my hands. The level of my character dictates the quality of that save roll. Therefore, it's all out of my hands. There's no control in that anyway. That's part of the joy, right? You're a victim, right? And D&D ultimately is, you are ultimately a victim over and over and over. And that's okay, because again, it's a game. It's designed to create a particular type of environment for the players in the game at the table. And then the other thing, of course, that for me is relevant is conflict. Conflict is what makes story. Conflict is the reason I'm a character. If there's no conflict, I'm not compelled to do anything in particular, right? And I think this is where role-playing games get it wrong. This is where DMs get it wrong. This, even in D&D, right? Yeah, you dangle the carrot of the grand gem, but three guys in the party don't give a shit about collecting treasure. They're not going to pursue the grand gem, right? So how are you going to motivate the characters, the players as these characters, to pursue a thing? Well, I think conflict creates decision creates results create the next series of decisions. So it seems to me, for me, role-playing should be first and foremost about decision making, right? It's not so much I'm going to lift the portcullis, right? I have a choice. I can ignore it and go and try to find another way into the castle, or I can put all my effort into lifting the portcullis, etc. That's a decision, but there's no risk reward there, right? I'm either going to lift it or I'm not going to lift it, and it becomes a pass-fail situation. And if I fail to do that, which was the easy way, then we're all scratching our heads going, well, how else do we get in this thing? And we start looking for secret passages. We start circling the battlements, looking for a crack in the wall or something. That becomes the other decision. But the decision to lift the portcullis was trying to just get through the door, right? That's not the same as the risk reward of choosing to do something that in a way cuts off the other avenue, right? So again, I'm going to use the example of this Return of the Heavyweight Champ because I don't get to experience this kind of thing in role playing as much as I do in, say, a board game. And it sounds ridiculous to think, what role playing games miss is what board games get right. And I don't mean the chips and the cards and the board itself and moving around. No. I mean, you have to make tough decisions. Even in Monopoly, do I buy this property? I have to make a decision. I've only got so much money. Do I buy this property? Am I trying to get over there to get that property? If I do this, I won't have the money to buy that property on the, you're making tough decisions. Do I put a hotel on this? Do I, whatever happens. And then of course there's the bad luck of landing on Joe's property with a hotel. But it's decision making that becomes interesting for you strategically, or for you as a human being in an environment in which you make decisions, and you're going to experience this kind of narrative outcome from that, right? And again, I haven't even read yet the Contender role-playing game that won the Ronnie Awards. I did get it, and I have it. I just haven't printed it out yet. It's 45 pages. I'll be able to get it printed out, and then I'm going to sit in it. I think it would make for an interesting solitaire. It demands certain things, and there's some choices you make, etc. I think those would be relevant because you're trying to score, you're trying to build up hope, or you're trying to build up reputation, you're trying to do something so you can ultimately win the game based on your character's desired outcomes. But then, of course, those are decisions, and making decisions is paramount to exploring characters, and then the fallout from those decisions, whether it leads to a positive outcome or a negative outcome, it's what I want to experience as a character. The positive outcome is easy. I got the door open. I picked the lock. I got the door open. Yeah, guys, we're in the room, and now we can pillage and steal treasure and crowns and weapons, and everybody goes, yeehaw, we got some reward here. Not picking the lock, now we're just not in the room. But if not picking the lock resolves itself as guards coming around the corner and arresting us, that's pretty interesting. So in D&D, the failed lockpick leads to guards arriving. That leads to confrontation. That leads to combat, right? As opposed to failing to pick the lock gets us actually caught, put into a situation where we're now going to be prosecuted, and we're now going to be in jail, and we have other issues to resolve, right? Our characters are now going through a different situation. So it's not about narrative storytelling. It's about the consequences of a failed action becomes a different challenge, a different conflict. And I think that is for me as a character in these crazy situations with these crazy other people, despite the mechanism of the device. Now, obviously, the mechanism of the device is going to be predicated upon what the game system's about: killing things, collecting treasure, solving the mystery. Not being rendered insane by the Cthulhu, monsters, whatever the mechanism of, the thing, which is why I'm sure games like Call of Cthulhu are so different and so important to certain types of players, because it's about the experience of the character facing these things, not so much about success, not so much about, but I do believe, narrative comes from the actions, and the results create an actual story, or at least a narrative to some degree. And I was thinking about this as a player. I'm so different as a player. As a GM, I have, as I became a player, because again, prior to 2014 or something, when I started playing in the community as an adult, and I played a little bit. I mean, I played with, as a kid growing up, once in a while, Jeff would run a game, or Ron would run a game, or Scott would run a game. So we were players, but I mean, it wasn't consistent as far as I didn't get to be a player all the time. We weren't really, it was a game to us. We weren't really trying to perfect the art of role playing. We weren't trying to, we were just kids playing. And as I got older and I experienced running games like Top Secret for my brother and his wife, and my wife and her sister and boyfriend when we were adults, and I was running more sophisticated games, or at least I thought so. It was not Dungeons and Dragons. They were Top Secret and Indiana Jones Adventures, and they were stuff that was a different kind of environment, right? They weren't just trudging through dungeons with swords and shields and trying to get to the end of the dungeon or whatever. Again, as I grew up, and then of course I played a little bit as an adult in a D&D campaign. I think 2 or 3 sessions maybe. But outside of that, I never really experienced role playing as a player, and I certainly didn't experience different games really as a player. I did run different games, Top Secret and Top Secret's later, Chill. So I ran a lot of games here and there, but I didn't at the time recognize the mechanism as the game system itself attempting to impart a particular experience, right? You just ran the game based on the rules, and you maybe didn't give it a lot of introspective thought as to what does it mean to call up that challenge for Joe's character to pick the lock in this game versus failing to pick a lock in D&D, right? Okay, or whatever, right? So what I'm saying is 2012, 2013, 2014, when I started playing more in the community, I started playing a lot more online because there wasn't a lot of choices. In town here, it would have been, at the time, I didn't know anybody who was actually a GM and running games. And then, of course, I met Big Mike, and Big Mike was running D&D, or versions of D&D, and D&D 5th edition, 4th edition, etc. So it was that experience, and they were great for what they are. But I was definitely conflicted with what character meant to me versus my options mechanically. And of course, I can be a character in my head and experience the game as this character, but then the contraption of the mechanics ultimately direct the experience I'm going to have fulfilled. Am I going to be contented and rewarded or fulfilled in this experience, not just to have fun with the guys, which I do want. I mean, obviously having fun is the paramount part, but everybody's fun is different, right? Some people enjoy gardening, some people enjoy cooking, some people, it just depends. I enjoy lifting weights. I don't like to run. I hate running, but I like to lift weights. It's, so we choose what suits us. And therefore we get different benefits, right? Lifting weights is a whole different physical benefit versus say running, but we're still going to be, we're going to have that endorphin rush, and we're going to probably, right? Okay. So for me, I was thinking as a GM, as I've experienced games as a player, and I've read more games, and I've experienced different games as a player, and I've actually run different games as a player. And I would say now in the last 10 years, I've had a plethora of experience prior to the first 30 years of my life, right? So the first 30 years I was just one experience, one type of thing, and much of it was vague recollections of my childhood, and then a little bit here and there as an adult, but only game here, game there. And then like a 10-year glut where I didn't do anything, didn't read anything, didn't own anything. And then suddenly for the last 12 years or so, it's been just this amazing glut of experiences, this ton of stuff. But it's changed how I GM, and it's changed how I perceive my job as a GM, as a facilitator of a game, etc. Now the games ask you to do different things as a GM, of course, just like the mechanics are different, just like you ask the players to do different things, right? And some of those things, in my experience with Ubiquity and how you create a character, and then how that character is connected to the party, and how that character has particular role-playing devices. Like I'm greedy, therefore if I play to that greediness, I'm going to get more bonuses. They're going to reward me for being greedy, and then I'm going to be able to use that reward to succeed at a mechanized thing. And that's all fine and dandy, but it's ultimately still about succeeding in a mechanized thing. Versus I'm greedy because my character's greedy. You start playing toward those things, trying to get a tool that's going to make you succeed at the other things that maybe is the foregone conclusion. The foregone conclusion is you're probably going to be put in a challenge in this situation that could be life or death, or you're going to be put in a challenge that's going to direct whether you get audience with the king, and therefore you're going to play up the greedy part in the street, hoping to get a reward. So later, when you have to bluff the guards, you can get in to see the king. You can use all those resources to automatically get in and see the king. It's kind of an interesting thing, right? So as a player, always I'm first about the character and experiencing the game, the world, the other players at the part, at the group, at the table, etc., as this character experiencing this thing. Because when it comes right down to it, that's all that's going to be consistent for me in all my gaming, because the mechanisms won't be consistent. The the game what I mean by that is the game we choose to play will be different. Like, we might play 2D20 Conan, and then on, in a week from now, you might play this. And so the mechanisms could be completely different from every game to game. The mechanisms of your character, the mechanisms of how the GM imparts challenges, et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing that I know is consistent for me is I'm here to be a character experiencing this thing. And again, this is why I've always preferred simple, because I want that mechanism to basically just resolve the conflict that we aren't in control of. And I mean by that is the challenge that we're not in control of. I can't just pick the lock, right? When a game system says I have the ability to pick a lock, every time we come to a locked door, what if I pick the lock? There's no challenge here. That's one of the things I do well. No question. Jason's here because he's the demolitions guy. He can, which means he automatically can disarm a bomb. He can automatically arm a bomb. He can automatically build a bomb. Why can't it be that way? I'm the demolitions guy. Anything involving demolitions is automatic. Everything else could be a potential check, a card flip, a dice check, rock, paper, scissors, right? I don't care what the mechanism is, right? But I thought about how does that ultimately affect me? Because I come genuinely to play every game. Obviously, my job as a player is to know the rules, so I can help facilitate my part of the mechanized part of the game, so I don't overstep or I don't do something wrong, or I'm misutilizing the talents or skills or whatever. There's some responsibility for the player in that, but at the same time, ultimately, I'm there to genuinely, authentically experience this shared imaginative event, social event from the mindset of my character. And that's the reason I like to role play, right? I like to get into the mindset of this guy and how would he experience this heist? How would he experience this surviving in a life raft with 3 other people starving, or whatever the case may be. And I think we're limited not only by mechanics, we're limited by our ability to manifestly understand what's really the dilemma in a lifeboat, right? How do you role play and create the dilemma that you're starving, you're lost at sea, and what is the actual conflict and dilemma among your 3 other companions in the boat, right? Is that a vain impromptu conversation like you would do in an acting studio? There's what is the conflict, what is the relevance, when you have no control over the outcome, right? You're lost in a lifeboat, right? So it becomes a exercise in dialogue. It becomes an exercise in frustration, right? So bad idea for a role-playing game, maybe. I don't know. Again, I can't. This is what I mean by having the ability to facilitate in our imaginations what part of that is a successful role-playing model, right? Okay. And I think, because people do want the game, they want to experience being a hero, or they want to experience to be a cop. They want to experience being a detective. They want to experience being a successful, or they want to experience being a wizard, or whatever it is, whatever game they choose to be in, the world they're playing with these groups, and whatever character or idea of what their ultimate goal is. It strikes me conflict is number one, and conflict and choice. And when I talk about choice, I'm not talking about being railroading, right? When you play a game like Call of Cthulhu, you're going to be, I guess, in a scene, detecting, experiencing whatever that scene is designed to create. But there should be choices, right? So I have a choice. Coming all the way back around to the Return of the Heavyweight. Why does Return of the Heavyweight Champ successful for me? Why is it a remarkable game for me? Is I have choices, but I have to choose one, and then I don't know the consequences of that. I know what my goal is. I know what I'm trying to achieve, so I can eventually successfully win the game. I choose to train, cost me money, cost me time, and I have so much, right? There are these resources that become paramount. I weigh the resources. Do I have the money to train? Do I have the experience points to train? Do I want to take this month to train, or do I want to fight where I can earn money, but I could ultimately win or lose the fight, or I could ultimately get hurt, whatever the case may be. And so you're weighing all the consequences, and you're trying to take these choices, right, and navigate. And then there's the the random kind of chance, right? It's not, it has nothing to do with my ability as a boxer. You don't call it my boxer's strength. You don't call it my boxer's attributes. I make a decision. I roll a universal table, and the table tells me the consequences of this month's training. And I may get a positive result. I may get a negative result. I may get a really bad result. I may break even. Then I have to make the next decision. And that is pretty interesting to me. And role playing is a different monster, of course. But what I mean by that is when we have those choices, and they're not solely based on making a dice check, or attribute check or a skill check, right? But what's important is the decision eliminating maybe one half of, if I choose to go this way, this is gone. Now I have to discover the consequences of that decision, and there has to be some give take, right? And this is where I think things become more interesting as a game, as a role-playing game, as a character in a world or environment. And I think some systems are designed very well to put the players in that situation, regardless of the IP or the genre, or etc. And I don't know in role playing whether that is as common, and I don't think it is as common, right? Role playing is interesting, and the older I get, the more I experience it as a GM, and I'm more experienced as a player, the more I'm almost more confounded by it than what I used to assume it was, and what I used to just plow through it is. This is my role. This is what I do. And I mean, as a GM, and on the other side of the table, it's like, okay, I'm a player at the whims of this thing and this world, and what, make a die roll. And, you're kind of, it's like you're fending off blows, right? It's like, holy, catch my breath, And now, even when I read the books, and I of course, trying to, create Dark Age of Man, this process was vast and different in the development, or the idea of what is it we're trying to achieve with Dark Age of Man, what is it I'm trying to do for the player and the GM, but also to what end? What's the ultimate goal? To experience characters in this Dark Age world. That's it. And to make it easy for the GM to create this naive situation where they are wowed and surprised by the variables that pop up. And it becomes not about, uh-oh, dragon, I get to use it to kill the characters. It's, how do I introduce this dragon? And, because there's not necessarily motivation. The dragon is doing what? It's swooping. I could make that dragon I could make that dragon injured in the woods, and they come across this giant dragon that's actually wounded in the woods, right? It doesn't have to be a dragon attack, right? It's just dragon, right? And how do these characters who come stumbling through the woods of Dark Age of England and go, holy shit, a dragon, right? What do they do with that information? What do they do with that dilemma? And and then from those decisions come consequences, or I should say, other results that then lead to more interesting directions, without there being, in a way, some kind of idea that we're here to become fighter level 10, right? Or we're here to, again, whether I'm talking about the class-based level mechanical system, okay, Savage Worlds does it differently, but there's still a reason you're playing Savage Worlds, to experience an adventure, to experience these characters in these crazy environments. One session of Savage Worlds in and of itself is about the experience of those characters in that. Think of it as an episodic one-off movie, right? Might have a sequel. You might actually decide that was so fun, let's have a sequel. Let's bring these characters back into a sequel, right? Kind of thing. That's my feel of Savage Worlds, right? But the desired effect is to be the character in this kind of high octane, high energy thing, versus, say, Blood and Bone for me, which created this idea that the characters' motivations, the characters' build, and the character having to connect dots to other people in the party, which I know other games that did this before, but I had not played many or run any that had this sense that you have to explain why you're with this party, and who in the party is important to you, and who in the party do you have an affinity for, and who in the party do you have an aversion to. And it creates this kind of dynamic. And then we present them in this dark world, and the die system is fast and fun, and again creates kind of a high. The irony is it's a dark, kind of gloomy world, but the actual mechanics create, for me, more of a high adventure Conan type feel. And I'm not certain Blood and Bone meant for it to be that way, but how I played Blood and Bone and how the mechanics informed me as a GM that this is how the game's supposed to go, it created a very high adventure feel for me. Although the atmosphere, the world itself was this oppressive, gloomy, dark, very, again, Blood and Bone is one of my all-time favorite games. But so I'm almost more confounded the more I experience, the more I know, because I stop and say, okay, how would I actually facilitate this? And what is the goal? Even when I run Simba with the guys, is it to tell them a story? Is it to drop them into some story? Is it to invite them to be their characters and explore? And that there is some ramifications for good decisions and bad decisions, not good decisions. I don't want to put good and bad on it. Decision A versus decision B. And if they do decision B, they have that experience, but then is there fallout from ignoring A? And that becomes, in a way, less relevant because they don't have to know A at all. They've explored B, but what does that mean? Well, the characters and what they experience is what's valid. Everything else in the world is irrelevant. We're not exposed to it because the characters aren't exposed to it. So what a GM knows about that castle and how much he would love the players to go to that castle because it's this amazing thing in the castle. It's irrelevant. It's whatever the characters are pursuing and doing, that's what's relevant. Nothing else matters. But at the same time, what is it we're trying to provide in space for those? Mechanically, it's obvious. The game tells you mechanically what you're doing. The game might even tell you how all of this is meant to achieve a particular outcome, right? And if they succeed, yay, everybody's happy, they win, etc. If they fail, oh well, it was fun. We played the One Ring and we got what we got from it, right? Okay. So anyway, I thought about this just this morning when I was thinking about what is it about some of my tabletop board games, sports games otherwise, and what is it that's most rewarding about some of those. And then what is it so rewarding about role playing? It's not whether I'm succeeding or not. It's about being the opportunity to be a character and experience other characters and in a world and having actual choices that have risk, reward, and consequences. Success and the activation of mechanics is the thing I'm least concerned about, because if it's about just a simple challenge, hey, you are a thief, you can hide in shadows, you can lockpick, and when they're doing those things, they're automatically successful. All Dell has to say to me is, hey, I'm gonna stay out of the light here. If we come to a locked door, et cetera, Dell just says, hey, I step up with my tools and I open the door. And that was his role. That's his job. And then he's a character in this thing. But then when Dell steps out of that and says, hey, I'm going to mix a concoction of poison. Now we got a challenge on our hands. You're going to have to make a die roll here. That die roll could literally be arbitrary. You got a 25% chance here, Dell. You don't have a clue. Nowhere on your character sheet does it say you understand how to mix potions or poisons. If you succeed, you'll do it, but you'll also get to put on your character sheet, knows how to concoct poisons. In the future, anytime you want to make a poison, it's automatic now, right? That's kind of a neat thing, right? But what are the consequences of failure there, right? Well, I don't make the poison, and I'm going to have the same crappy chance to make a poison next time I try to make a poison. But when it comes to picking the lock, gotcha. Hiding in shadows, gotcha, right? I can do those things. That's what I am as a talented person or a talented thing, right? But I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, the more I GM and the older I get, the more mature I get, the more I've experienced all these different games, the more I recognize I want to facilitate the game properly. But I also want to provide an interesting space so the players enjoy sitting at my table and they enjoy, what I put in front of them, right? I'm not overly descriptive. I never have been overly descriptive. I'm not overly interested in props. I despise maps and minis. I want to be in the head. I want them in the head. I used to describe more because I was theater of the mind. I would try to give them all the minutia. But I realized later, what online playing really taught me, I made these assumptions at the table that they could follow along and keep up in a table. And I could always look at them and I could always say, I could pick up cues they weren't understanding, or somebody could draw a map real quick and say, do you mean this, Jason? And I could say, oh, yeah. And I could draw it out. But online, what I realized was, you overwhelm people with all the minutia of the stuff. It's not necessarily conducive to communicating effectively, right? So much of my online gaming has influenced how I communicate, and for good or ill. And I think for me, more relaxed, more content, much more happy to GM. And I learned that through online play and communication. I've also learned that I'm less invested in the thing that I think is, I'm more invested in the players and the characters. I am interested in providing interesting conflicts, or I'm interested in making sure those conflicts aren't lost or ignored, right? I mean, I don't provide the conflict, but I'm going to hold Brian's character in Dark Age of Man. He's created an environment through his actions that I can't now let just kind of slide away. He hasn't done anything wrong. What I mean by that is it's my responsibility to make sure the world, that conflict arises in the world, so Brian is ultimately affected by it, and affected by it not necessarily in a negative way, but in a fallout from other decisions he's made. But it doesn't have to be in a negative way, like somehow disastrous to him, right? But the world will reflect back who he's presented as a human being, right? I'm a firm believer in real life. Who we are, the world reflects back what we give it, right? I give it hostility and anger and dickheadedness. I'm going to get back hostility, anger, and dickheadedness, right? I give the world enthusiasm, positivity, peace, and love. I generally get that back, right? I think your role-playing world should do some of that too, right? So anyway, long, convoluted. As you can tell, I don't write this stuff down. I don't read off a teleprompter. I don't pre-prepare any of these videos. I like to have thought experiments, and I like to share just kind of what's banging around in my head. I don't pretend to be teaching. I don't pretend to be giving tutorials. I do not pretend to be giving advice. None of those things are what I'm about. It's about exploring this amazing hobby and these experiences and understanding and deciphering the curiosities that I encounter and the what if, how could it be different? And that comes also from great dialogue with my peers and contemporaries. When somebody asks a question I don't have an answer to, or somebody asks a question that makes me think, yeah, that's an interesting thing. How does that work? What am I doing that isn't that? What am I doing that could be that? You know, what can I learn about how investigation in a role-playing session could be more interesting to the players if it's more vague or if it's less vague, right? I don't know. And I don't pretend to be a psychological genius either when it comes to understanding how to best pull the players into the thing, right? And so we tend to GM I think we tend to GM like we'd like to be affected by a GM. I tend to want to provide to the players what I'd like them to provide to me, probably as a player. Hard to say though. See, can I separate my GM head from my player head? That's interesting. And then someone who's tried to develop a game. I first started developing Dark Age of Man from two places. One, the idea of this world I had, and the idea that players would actually develop a reputation that would affect the broader world. But I didn't know how to mechanically institute that at the time. I didn't understand how that should impact the game at the time. And I wasn't thinking at all about how that affects the player or how that affects the GM. And then over the last 5 or 6 years, I've slowly realized that part of Dark Age of Man, the process of building Dark Age of Man was what would I like to GM? What would I like to do as a GM? And what have I been doing that blew my mind as a GM? When I came up with the naive narrator concepts, and Dale and I were kind of fooling with these ideas in other games, and I went, "Oh my God, this has liberated me from the knowing. It's liberated me from this guy who knows that I can't explain it." And I've talked to Ad infinitum about it, but then I went, "Okay, how can I quantify this? How can I put this in a way that other players might get to experience this amazing kind of open." I don't know. I can't even describe it, but I attempted to. Then Dark Age Mansion comes up. Well, how do I get that written in a book? But at the same time, how do we provide all the necessary rules for the player? Because you're technically writing the game for multiple people. You're writing it for players who are going to be characters who need to understand the world and the game and the devices and what they can and cannot do. And then you're writing for the GM and how he's going to facilitate this thing. And so it's made me think much broader, right? That doesn't mean I don't have my baggage. It doesn't mean I don't have my preferences from my childhood and the things I like and prefer. I've said it before. I have my fingerprint, and I can't change that. I have a particular bent. I can't change that. I can broaden and I can learn, but there are certain things about me that are me, and I'm not going to apologize for that, and I'm not going to change that necessarily. If I like chocolate ice cream, I'm not going to change it. Now I may stop eating ice cream if I'm lactose intolerant. I may stop eating chocolate ice cream if I'm diabetic, right? I'll get sugar-free ice cream, right? But I'm probably still going to like chocolate over vanilla, right? It's, so what? It's the way we are. Anyway, I just wanted to share this because I've been thinking a lot about how can I, as a GM, facilitate better for the character to be the character and experience their character and experience the conflicts, and then how better can I make sure the conflicts aren't overwhelming, but at the same time, and I don't mean just combat, I mean conflict. Their character dealing with tough choices, their character dealing with non-black and white options, right? Not necessarily morality or etc., but just can I provide a realistic world with realistic non-binary results, right? That's not just right and wrong, right? And one of the things I've learned with Dark Age of Man is the world itself fosters that. And not because I've written some world, but because the fact that we go in understanding certain truths about the world, but we know nothing beyond that. And then I'm rolling a die to say, oh, wow, the King's Men are showing up today. What is that? Why are the King's Men coming to Dark? Why are they coming to Dredgewater? Well, I could tie that to what happened in the last episode. I could tie that to the famine. I could tie that to the impending war between the pagans and Christians, or they could be there for something else. And I could throw a whole new curveball at the group by saying the King's Men have arrived in force, and they're here to conscript all able-bodied men because they're about to go over to Ireland and wage war against the Queen. Now, suddenly, Brian's character is being conscripted. I mean, all of a sudden, the conflicts of the Christians and the pagans in Dredgewater are subsumed by the king conscripting them into the war against the Irish. And now they're on a boat. They're going across the channel to Ireland, and they're going to wage. And the characters are swept up in this. Do they run? Do they hide? Do they fight it? Do they want to be commanders? Are they soldiers? Are they going to join the Irish against the England? This is, and we don't know. I don't know. But it's the character's dilemma now. Does Brian want to be conscripted? How's he going to avoid being conscripted? What's his, all because I happen to roll Kings, and I'm like, why are they here? Why are they coming? And I have to somehow come up with it. I don't have time to write out a whole paragraph and I don't get the time to tree out all the possibilities and say, no, they're here. You're going to be linearly driven into a war. No, that's what they're here for. That's their motivations. How are you going to navigate this? Dale might run right up to him and say, sign me up. I'm ready to go, right? Brian might say, hell no, I'm hiding out in the forest until these guys clear out, right? And, it's just, this is, and again, is that a better experience? There is no story, but the story comes from these characters making decisions and how it all unfolds. And that, to me, is why I play. And it's the kind of experience I also would like to have as a player. And that's also an interesting thing, right? It's not the only experience I want to have, and it's not that there's a better experience than another, but it's also, as a player, I want to experience a character with these in a world that's that dynamic, right? And that's kind of a neat thing to think about. So, all right, thanks for watching. Good day.